Thank you. We now move to topical questions. Question number 1, a point of order from Willie Rennie.
On a point of order, Presiding Officer, it's good to have you back, Presiding Officer. But members will have heard this morning that the Scottish Government had published a document that it purported to be the plan for the transition to independence. It had been released to the press and sent to other governments without the courtesy of any of the available parliamentary routes being taken. This Parliament might have wanted to see this document before it was signed, sealed and sent. We might have wanted to correct the factual inaccuracies about Lincoln, press for a bit more than 3 paragraphs on transition and challenge the proposal that the SNP appoint themselves to the new top posts of Scottish Foreign and Defence Secretaries, even before an election. There are fewer than 300 words to explain the complex task of unravelling a 300-year-old union, negotiating 14,000 international treaties and establishing a new defence force and security services. We are promised yet more of this in the months ahead, so are we really expected to simply sit by our radios every morning to wait for the latest announcement? This document fuels the suspicion that the SNP have not done their homework. 20 pages of flannel is not adequate. So, Presiding Officer, understanding Order 7.3, will you support a demand by this Parliament that we have sight of and scrutinise these documents as they are released in the coming months, so that we have a chance to insist that the Scottish Government does its homework? If we don't demand a change of attitude now, we will have to continue to endure this shabby treatment.
I thank the member for the advance notice of his point of order. It has enabled me to consider the important issues that he raises. All members should be aware that the Good Practice Guide on announcements by the Scottish Government states that major policy announcements should, in the first instance, always be made to the Parliament, and that the judgment on this rests with Minister. As the guidance also acknowledges, decisions on whether and how to make announcements to Parliament and government business are a matter for the Scottish Government. Any discussion on the Parliament's future business programme or a request for a statement should be raised by a party's business manager, and I note that Alison McInnes made the point about this issue and also on the capital infrastructure at the Parliamentary Bureau today. Members will notice that I have selected a topical question on the capital infrastructure programme as a topical question, and I intend to allow as many supplementary requests from other members on this issue as time allows. Mr.
Have you received any indication at all from the Government as to whether they wish to make a statement?
The Government has made no indication to me, but I notice that the Minister for Parliamentary Business is indicating to me at the moment. Mr Fitzpatrick.
And just to be helpful to the Chamber, on the point that Mr Rennie has made and that Alison McInnes made this morning, I can confirm that the Referendum Committee was notified of the document and given the document this morning prior to its release. And I think it's absolutely correct that the Referendum Committee should go through the proper parliamentary scrutiny and look at the document and decide what further action this Parliament chooses to take.
We now move to topical questions. Question number 1, Richard Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and welcome back. To ask the Scottish Government what progress it's making in delivering infrastructure projects.
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
The Scottish Government is making good progress in delivering our infrastructure plans. Yesterday we published a report on our progress in 2012, together with updated programme and project pipelines. The progress report outlined that 9 of the major infrastructure projects included in the Infrastructure Investment Plan published by my predecessor in December 2011 have been completed and are now in use. These have a value of over £600 million. The Capital Investment Programme is on course to spend £3.1 billion for 2012-13, which will support an estimated 40,000 jobs across the Scottish economy.
Richard Baker.
Thank you. Yesterday, outside this chamber, the Cabinet Secretary spoke of ambitious plans to invest in infrastructure. But today we have further information from the Scottish Futures Trust on the slippage of the MPD programme. Previously blamed on Borders Rail and the AWPR, we now know this only accounts for £39 million with a £333 million slippage. Can the Deputy First Minister tell us why, of the £119 million scheduled to be spent on school projects through MPD in 2012-13, the total spend was in fact nothing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I firstly say that all of the MPD programme will be delivered, and I'm sure that's something Parliament will welcome. The variance between 12-13 forecasts and some of the figures that have been cited inside and outside this chamber are due to a variety of reasons. For example, the Hub Health and Schools projects, colleges and the M8 being forecast to reach financial close later than was originally estimated. The First Minister, as Richard Baker has indicated, has also cited the example of the legal challenge to the AWPR, a matter completely out with the Government's control, as the kind of reason that programmes can be subject to delay. The fact of the matter is these are large, complex projects being procured by a wide range of different procuring authorities. Sufficient time taken up front in the preparation and design stages can and will deliver better overall value for money. For example, use of benchmarking and careful design within the schools programme, which was specifically mentioned by Richard Baker, means that we will deliver 67 schools instead of 55 schools for the same budget, getting more out of our money, which I would hope Richard Baker and other members would support. Progress with the MPD programme will now speed up significantly. The first MPD health project has already moved into construction, with the first college due to do so in April of this year. And finally, Presiding Officer, there is something rather hypocritical about some of the remarks made by the opposition, because of course all of the cuts to our traditional capital budget being implemented by the current UK Tory Liberal government were first planned to the very penny by Alistair Darling and the last Labour government.
Richard Baker.
That is wrong. And beyond that, the important issue here, of course, is this investment is needed now. And the Deputy First Minister referred to the AWPR. That accounts for none of the slippage I referred to in my question. Looking to the future, as she clearly wants to do, unsurprisingly, why have the planned £150 million for schools investment through MPD next year is it now scheduled that only £62 million will be spent on schools? Can you tell us which school projects are being delayed and why?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say in fairness to Richard Baker, I may have been wrong in what I said earlier on about Alistair Darling. I think, to be strictly accurate about it, Alistair Darling actually planned more in the way of capital cuts than is actually being implemented by the Conservative Liberal government. The fact of the matter is our NPD programme, together with the switch from revenue to capital, is supplementing a traditional capital budget that has been dramatically cut. That is a sign of a government determined to maximise our capital spending because of the benefit we recognise that brings to the economy and the support and creation of jobs across the economy. I've already commented to Richard Baker about the time deliberately taken up front in preparation and design to make sure that we are delivering overall value for money. In other words, getting the most out of our capital investment that we possibly can. And I would have thought even Richard Baker, not known for his quickness to compliment the government, would find it within himself to welcome the fact that we now estimate we will deliver 67 schools instead of 55 schools. I think that is a thoroughly good thing. SFT's use, for example, of reference design, standardised contracts is now speeding up procurement. So this government is committed and will remain committed to doing everything we possibly can within the powers and resources we have to maximise our capital spend. Of course, if we had the full economic powers that independence would give us, we could do even more.
Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary said, and I quote, "NPD progress will speed up over the next few years." It could hardly slow down over the next few years. Let me return to schools. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary specifically, why was nothing spent on the schools programme in 2011-12? Why was nothing spent this financial year when £119 million was predicted? And why is it only going to be £62 million next year when it should have been £150? Just saying they're complex projects, frankly, isn't good enough. And I think this chamber and this country deserves a better explanation than that.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, this country perhaps deserves an explanation from the party that Gavin Brown is a member of as to why our capital budget is being cut by 26%. And frankly, members in the opposition benches would have a bit more credibility in coming to this chamber and talking about capital investment if the parties that they support and are members of weren't slashing the capital budget of this government. Now, in terms of the NPD programme, a programme put in place by this government to ensure that we can continue to secure investment in much-needed infrastructure projects, a programme that will deliver the projects that it has committed to deliver, a £2.5 billion programme. In specific answer to the questions that Gavin Brown raised, if he had been listening to my answers to Richard Baker, he would have heard me say very openly and very frankly that Hub Health and Schools projects in particular reached financial close later than had originally been anticipated. But the fact of the matter is, this is a programme that will be delivered in full, and the value of that, added to the value of our cut traditional capital budget, added to the value of the money we are taking from revenue to spend on capital, will ensure that in this year we will spend £3.1 billion in infrastructure projects, next year £3.4 billion, supporting the economy, supporting jobs, and together with, for example, our commitment to procurement reform, evidence that this government is absolutely committed to ensuring that we do everything possible to support economic recovery.
Briefly, Mr Brown.
Thank you, President. I think there were traces of horse meat in that answer, I have to say. In terms of colleges, then, let's move on to colleges. Colleges were supposed to have £65 million spent on them this year. The figure will now be zero. Why is it going to be zero?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, if Gavin Brown, sorry, I'm getting the mixed up. Maybe there's something in that I find it difficult to distinguish between the Labour and the Conservative spokespeople on this issue, because if I can remind the Chamber, every penny of the cuts being implemented by the Tories were first planned by Alistair Darling and the Labour government. But specifically on colleges, Gavin Brown will be aware of NPD projects entered procurement in 2011-12, due to start construction this year. City of Glasgow College, Inverness College, Kilmarnock College, projects getting underway, getting into construction, supporting jobs, boosting the economy, and I would have thought that is something that, whether you're on the Tory, the Labour or the Liberal benches, would manage to welcome as good for Scotland's economy.
In her revised plan, has she accelerated plans for transport routes to the north and the north east from the Central Belt by road and rail, including the A9?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Willie Rennie will have no doubt had the opportunity to look in detail at the updated infrastructure investment plan published yesterday. I'm more than happy to write to him in detail, drawing out all of the specific issues on transport routes to the north, underlining what this government is doing that previous governments failed to do in terms of some of the transport priorities in the north of the country, getting on with the work. And I'd be more than happy to write to Willie Rennie and lay all that out for him so that he's under no illusions about it.
Is the Cabinet Secretary aware that the parents, pupils and staff of James Gillespie's High School in my constituency are looking forward to a new state-of-the-art facility with sports facilities second to none as a result of the non-profit distribution model, and that the people of Edinburgh are delighted that they will not be lumbered with the excessive PFI charges introduced by the parties there and there?
Cabinet Secretary.
His constituents will welcome that, as will people in other parts of the country that will benefit from the new infrastructure projects, because that's what this is all about, supporting the economy and putting in place the modern infrastructure that this country needs. I visited yesterday the new South Glasgow Hospital, a hospital that will be a state-of-the-art hospital taking shape before our very eyes, delivered not under NPD, certainly not under PFI, but actually delivered within traditional capital. I saw a comment last night, I think from Ken McIntosh, although he'll accept my apologies if I'm misquoting him, saying that this was something the previous Labour government had planned and this government now was only announcing it. Well, the previous Labour government failed to deliver the new South Glasgow Hospital. It's this government that's delivering it and delivering the many other infrastructure projects around the country.
Question 2, Roderick Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had regarding the location of the headquarters of the Police Service of Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
We announced Tullyallen Castle would be the interim headquarters of the Police Service of Scotland in February 21st, 2012. The Police Service of Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority will consider the location of the permanent headquarters in due course, with the final decision subject to the agreement of the Scottish Government. However, they are currently focused on ensuring a smooth transition to the new single service on April 1st, 2013. And while the Scottish Government has a regular dialogue with the single service and the SPA on a wide range of issues, there has been no specific discussions to determine the location of the headquarters of the Police Service of Scotland.
Lord Campbell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but can the Cabinet Secretary assure me that the new Police Service of Scotland will not be perceived as having a focus on West Central Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely. This is a police service for all of Scotland, and it will be focused on all parts of Scotland, not one particular part, whether West Central Scotland or anywhere else. It's indeed for that reason that the new police service has local policing at its heart, serving all communities. Local commanders have been announced for each area to work with communities, and indeed local policing plans are being prepared for every one of Scotland's 353 council wards, whether in the west, whether rural, urban, island or mainland.
Elaine Smith. Ms Smith.
Thank you. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if any further consideration, though, has been given to locating the HQ at the Scottish Crime Campus in Gartcosh in my constituency, since he previously said it would provide a purpose-built national facility for the Police Service of Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think what's being built at Gartcosh is outstanding, and I look forward to going and visiting it as it continues to go apace. Clearly, that will be, as I said, ultimately a decision for the siting of the permanent headquarters of the Scottish Police Service will be a matter for the Scottish Police Authority and for the Police Service of Scotland. It would be for them to decide whether it should be Gartcosh or anywhere else. It would be fair to say that there is land available, but indeed at the present moment I think we should welcome what is being contributed at the crime campus there and leave it to others to decide in forthcoming years. But I have no doubt both Vic Emery, the Chair of the Police Authority, and Steve House, who Elaine Smith will doubtless know, would be happy to chat, because they are certainly, as I say, delighted at the progress that is currently being made at Gartcosh.
Alison McInnes.
Does the Cabinet Secretary nevertheless agree that it would send a strong message to the rest of Scotland if the headquarters were not in the Central Belt?
Cabinet Secretary.
And it's not a decision for the Scottish Government. We deliberately decided that it would be appropriate that the first temporary headquarters should be at Tullyallen Castle. After all, that has a historic history within the Police Service of Scotland. Every constable goes there, trains there, and frequently they go back for additional training. I will leave it, as I say, to the authority and to the Chief to decide where the permanent headquarters should be. But I think each and every one of us who have endured serving this building and indeed previous buildings are aware that the priority for the people of Scotland is to get the service on the road, whether parliamentary or police, and not to be obsessed with buildings.
Ends topical questions. The next item of business is a debate on